there and welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I've got my coffee with me, so feel free to grab your tea or whatever you like to sip on, and let's get started with our topic today. So here's the thing. Have you ever felt like your body is inflamed even though you're trying to eat healthy? Sometimes it could show up as feeling bloated all the time. Maybe your joints are stiff. Maybe you're reacting to foods that never used to bother you. And if you've been wondering what's going on or feeling like your healthy choices aren't helping, that's what we're going to talk about today. I actually got into this topic after being featured in Hone Health recently, where we talked about how food and gut health are tied to inflammation. And honestly, this topic is so misunderstood. So I wanted to do an episode on this and break this topic down in a way that actually makes sense. So we're going to talk today about what is inflammation and how does food fuel it, and what does that mean as far as what's going on in your gut. And if you're looking for a clear, simple place to start, I do have a free anti-inflammatory foods list. It literally is just a list of foods that help calm inflammation. I highly recommend downloading it. It's a great guide. All right, let's get into it by starting to talk about what is inflammation. We usually think of inflammation as swelling or pain, right? So if you break or if you sprain your ankle, you get inflammation there. So chronic inflammation is a little bit different and it's a lot sneakier. It's a low-grade ongoing activation of your immune system that can start slowly and affect everything from your gut to your energy levels, your skin, your joints, your brain. So whereas the ankle sprain analogy, that's going to be acute. The inflammation is there for healing. When our body's bombarded with chronic threats, we get chronic inflammation, and then our own tissues suffer, and a whole cascade of things can happen from there. Now, the way that it relates to gut health is most of your immune system is in your gut, about 70% of your immune system. So that's huge. And if your gut lining is inflamed or leaky, your immune system is constantly getting exposed to things it sees as threats, even if they're just normal parts of your diet. And that's when you start reacting to all sorts of foods, not because those foods are a problem, but because your immune system is already overstimulated. And this is where food sensitivity testing like MRT can be helpful. So MRT is called the mediator release test. It's one of the most precise and useful food sensitivity blood tests out there that we use in our practice for specific situations. We don't want to use it as just a way to find the food that's causing all your gut symptoms. Unfortunately, as tempting as it is to think there's a blood test that's going to pinpoint like one or two foods that we avoid them and everything's just going to get better, it doesn't really work like that. It's a way to temporarily reduce immune system noise, because when somebody's reacting to everything and feeling inflamed all over, the test can help us create a short-term calm down plan, not a long-term food avoidance strategy. So I just want to be clear about that, because I see food sensitivity tests being misunderstood as far as their usefulness, and they can lead to restrictive dieting, or the misconception that these foods need to be avoided forever. That can end up being restrictive. So the real work that we need to do is restoring gut function and calming inflammation at the root, so that you can eventually tolerate more foods, not fewer foods. So it's not just about identifying culprits, it's about reducing the overwhelm on your system so your body can start to heal. So we're going to talk more about what that means. Next, let's talk about what your gut might actually be trying to tell you. You've probably heard that term, leaky gut, before, but what does it actually mean? So think of your gut lining as a fine mesh filter. It's supposed to let nutrients through while keeping bigger, potentially problematic things like bacteria, toxins, and undigested food particles out of the bloodstream. But when that lining becomes damaged or too porous from chronic stress, poor diet, infections, inflammation, we see it a lot with SIBO, dysbiosis, parasites, bacterial overgrowth. But all the things I just listed can cause this leaky gut, and it starts to let things through that don't belong in the bloodstream. And when that happens, your immune system goes on high alert, starts reacting to things it normally wouldn't, like a food, for example. And that's when symptoms pop up, and not just digestively, because remember, these are food particles that are getting into the bloodstream and traveling all over. And so are the immune complexes that result from that. So you can start getting symptoms around the body, like brain fog, headaches, fatigue, skin issues like rashes, joint pain, or histamine reactions. And then you can continue to develop more and more food sensitivities over time from this, because it feeds into itself. And now you're eating foods that are causing inflammation on a gut level, now that your immune system's identified them as a threat. Now, because 70% of your immune system's in your gut, now you have all that inflammation happening in the gut, causing more leaky gut, causing more food sensitivities. So it does become a vicious cycle, and people tend to develop more and more sensitivities over time if the gut health is not addressed. And this is where it gets really interesting, because if you've been a regular listener, you've probably noticed we've been talking a lot about skin issues lately, things like eczema, psoriasis, chronic rashes, acne, and you might be wondering, what do skin issues have to do with gut health? And that's why. So when your immune system is inflamed or leaky, it's triggered constantly, and that systemic inflammation doesn't just stay in the gut, it shows up in other areas of the body. And for many people, the skin is one of the first places it becomes visible. So when I'm working with someone who has stubborn skin flare-ups, I'm always thinking about what's going on in the gut, because healing the gut is often the missing piece in calming down the skin. And we do see that when we clear SIBO, when we rebalance the gut, people's skin gets so much better. They stop having the rashes. We see this all the time. So it also works the other way. A lot of people come in to see me for their digestive issues, and they don't realize that their mood swings, their food reactions, or skin problems are also part of the same gut-driven pattern. A lot of times, someone won't even necessarily mention a specific problem to me in our initial intake. And then as we move through the process of healing their gut and rebalancing their microbiome and restoring the health of their gut, they start to mention, oh, and my rashes are getting better, or oh, this random symptom is getting better. And I'll say, I didn't even know you had that. I didn't think to mention it because they didn't think it was at all related. Now let's talk about foods that quietly fuel inflammation. So let's talk about the everyday foods that can quietly fuel this inflammation, because it's not always the obvious junk food at all, although that is a big part of it. Now, we're going to talk about oils here, but I want to be very clear, because we just did an episode about seed oils. And I'm not here to demonize seed oils. That episode was all about breaking down the nuances, the truth behind the science of different types of oils and their healthfulness or lack thereof. So some oils like sunflower or safflower are totally fine in moderation. The problem is that they often show up in ultra processed foods, and how much of them most people are eating without even realizing it. So refined seed oils can be inflammatory when they're eaten in so many different foods that they're eaten out of balance. Especially because in ultra processed foods, it's not just about the oil. They're very often combined with refined starches, added sugars, and preservatives. And so these are what I mean by ultra processed foods, like packaged snacks, frozen meals. Seed oils can also be in sauces, salad dressings, takeouts, you name it. So even though these are unsaturated, healthy oils, they're in so many different foods and often combined with other problematic ingredients that we're just out of balance. And especially with omega-3s, and they can then become pro-inflammatory, at least the way we consume in our diets. The next one is sugar, and we're not just talking about sweets. Sugar hides in lots of foods, flavored yogurts, coffee creamers, protein bars, granola. And it keeps your blood sugar spiking all day, which feeds inflammation and gut dysbiosis. Dysbiosis means imbalance of bacteria. Also, processed flours, that's like white bread, whether it's regular or gluten-free. If it's white, it's very processed. So gluten-free muffins would be made with ingredients like rice starch and tapioca starch, super high glycemic. So just because something's gluten-free doesn't mean it's healthy for you from a metabolic perspective. And so any processed flours, meaning we're not getting the whole grain, we're getting a white starchy flour. So they don't provide fiber or nutrients, like any of the fiber or nutrients that your gut lining needs to stay healthy and repair. And they often are also fine with those refined oils and sugars that we just talked about. So these refined flours can quietly contribute to that chronic inflammatory load. Then there are individual triggers, and that would be things like gluten, conventional dairy, alcohol, high histamine foods. These are inflammatory for everyone, but they're some of the most common ones that we see for people who have overwhelmed immune systems reacting to different random things. And that's where we sometimes bring in the MRT testing paired with a protocol that's called LEAP. And so MRT is the blood test, LEAP is the diet process where you use the blood test to inform a personalized elimination and reintroduction process to calm the inflammatory load in a person's body and ultimately pinpoint the foods that are most important to take a break from for a little while. So it's not about labeling foods as good or bad, but the MRT really does help us to uber personalize this because we described how leaky gut works and how you end up with just food particles getting into the bloodstream. And that can be anything. It doesn't have to be gluten or dairy. The reason gluten and dairy are the most common is because they're the most common in our food supplies. Those are just on the scene of the crime. They're getting into the bloodstream often. So when the immune system is overwhelmed, the immune system is seeing them and saying, you know what, I see this guy around here a lot. He looks suspicious. Boom. Now we're sensitive to him. But it can happen with any food. Seriously, it could be spinach, it could be mushrooms, it could be apples. That's where, in some cases, if someone's really dealing with a lot of systemic inflammation, it can be really helpful to use this test to inform a personalized immunocalm strategy. And I have seen it be so incredibly transformative when used in the right cases. And I'm emphasizing in the right cases because I just want to make it clear this isn't usually our starting point with gut health to do a blood test and see what foods you're sensitive to, because really, and we'll talk about it more in a second, we want to get the gut healthy. And in many cases, especially if there's not a large amount of symptoms outside of the digestive tract, we can get things calmed down enough that the person feels a lot better just working on their gut health. But if we get the gut rebalanced, healed, and you're still having a lot external, like outside of the gut symptoms, aches, brain fog, joint pain, skin issues, then it's a great idea to do the testing and see what's going on so that we can clean up those sensitivities as a result of when your gut was out of balance and inflamed. So that we've talked about what can quietly drive inflammation, let's shift into what you can do because this isn't about fear or cutting out everything you love. It's about giving your body the right kind of support so it can calm down, start to feel safe again. And one of the simplest things you can do is make gentle food swaps that are still satisfying. For example, if you've been using canola oil or vegetable oil, try switching to olive oil or avocado oil. These are rich in healthy fats, but actually help reduce inflammation. And they taste great in dressing, sautés, baking. Avocado oil has a really high smoke point, so it's excellent for high heat cooking. And that's a real gem right there because not all oils are. Olive oil is okay for moderate temp cooking, but you wouldn't want to use it saute over medium heat, but you would not want to turn it up to high or use it frying for a long period of time. If you're using flavored yogurts or creamers that are high in sugar, you could try plain yogurt and add your own fruit, or you could add a light drizzle of maple syrup, for example, or switch to a creamer with cleaner ingredients that's less sweet. So you don't have to give up on these comforts. You just shift how you're getting them, and that can make all the difference. Another great option is to focus on anti-inflammatory herbs and spices like turmeric, ginger, rosemary, basil, cumin. These are flavorful additions to your meals, and they're supportive for the gut lining and the immune system. So you can add them to soups, stews, roasted veggies, just wherever you can. My favorites are turmeric, and actually all those are my favorites that I just listed. That's probably why I listed them. With turmeric, you want to add just a little bit of black pepper to help its usefulness as an anti-inflammatory. And don't underestimate the power of just real whole foods, things like colorful vegetables. Get a bright variety of color. We say eat the rainbow, and that's because different colors of fruits and vegetables and other plant foods give you different nutrient profiles. So you want not just all greens, although greens is a big part of it, but you want blues like blueberries, you want reds like cherries and cranberries, you want yellows like squash, you want oranges like carrots. What did I leave out? You want white like cauliflower. So you really do want all the different colors. I'd say in a week's time, you'd want to get all the colors. And when you focus on nutrient dense options in their whole form doesn't mean you can't chop them up and stuff like that, but means that they're not uber processed or like in juice form, for example. When you focus on getting them in whole form, then your gut can actually absorb and use them. And it takes the pressure off your system and gives your body what it actually needs to rebuild. So you can and should make this enjoyable. We don't want to think of this as like a detox, something severe, and we're only doing for a day or two to really get a clean out. That's just not real. It's not really how the body works. We don't want to go to extremes because any extreme actually stresses the body versus we think the body wants a break, it doesn't. If you give your digestive system too much a break or your metabolism, it actually causes stress on your system. So we want to make small adaptable changes. And I do think that thinking in terms of swaps is one of the easiest way to make a change because you're not turning all your habits on their head. You're not just saying, okay, here's how I normally eat, and I'm going to go over here and eat completely different foods. You're swapping things out in a way that you already find palatable, that you're going to like enough to be able to sustain. And it can be an adventure. Think of it as a kind of a food adventure to find some of these. And this is what got me into nutrition in the first place. From a young age, I just loved finding healthier versions of my favorite foods. And I don't know how you want to look at it. Like, how can I make this healthier? I remember when I was just like even a teenager, I was thinking, I guess, of Alfredo, and I would take pasta and I'd put cottage cheese in it and garlic and Parmesan. And it was like a high protein, like Alfredo. So I just think of that as I've always enjoyed thinking, I don't know, I wouldn't probably do that now. I was just scrounging around the kitchen for things, but thinking of ways that you can just make your foods healthier. Now, in the next segment, we're going to zoom out and show you how this all fits into the bigger picture because food is part of it, but we also want to look at what's underneath the inflammation and how to get to the root instead of just managing your symptoms forever. Let's talk about what it really takes to get to the root because avoiding triggers is not a long-term solution. It's too restrictive, it's hard to do, it's limiting socially, it's limiting your happiness and your satisfaction with the way you eat and how your life is. And that stuff's really important. And at worst, you're not able to stick with it, and then you're back to where you started. At best, you stick with it and you're unhappy and you're isolated. And you can develop more issues over time if we don't get to the root. So if you're feeling inflamed, sensitive to everything, or like your body's constantly overreacting, the probably usually isn't in the food, it's in the gut. And more specifically, it's how the gut and the immune system are communicating. Getting to the root means focusing on restoring gut function, and that means healing the lining. But in order to do that, you have to calm down what's affecting the lining to begin with. So if that's a microbial imbalance, By that, I mean something like SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which is the most common root cause of IBS. It's the root cause of the vast majority of IBS cases. And other examples of microbial imbalances could be a large intestinal imbalance. So maybe you don't have an overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine, but maybe you have an overgrowth of bacteria in the large intestine, or it could be yeast. We have yeast overgrowth that can occur either in the small or the large intestine, or we can have other microbes, nasty types of things that shouldn't be there at all. If something like that's going on, which we see also in most IBS cases, then we want to clear that. So that's a big part of what we help people do naturally. And so, because that's often what's driving inflammation, that's causing that leaky gut. So we got to get that sorted out. We have to calm down the nervous system stress. So often we have, whether it's the chicken or the egg, if your stress started causing or contributing to an environment that set you up to have this problem. So an example of that would be chronic stress can slow motility. Maybe slow motility contributed to bacteria out of balance, or chronic stress can also inhibit the immune system. So maybe the immune system would normally be keeping back certain bacteria in check, but when it's inhibited, bacteria is allowed to overgrow. So nervous system can be a precursor for these issues to happen, but also once you have these troubling symptoms, now you're stressed. So it could be the chicken and the egg, but part of it in most cases is also calming the nervous system down because it's become accustomed to this stress state. And then improving how your body handles food by doing these things. And so that's how we set up the lining to be able to heal. And then certainly there's gut healing supplements out there. Those can be helpful to give the gut lining nutrients that it needs to heal, but only once you've done these other things first. And then this also frees up the demands on the immune system, because now that your immune system's not fighting a bacterial or microbial insult, it's like it's been fighting this war. And now the war's over. You have resources to do other things that like fight off actual pathogens in the air. So the immune system starts to settle, so there's less inflammation. The gut's allowed to heal mostly from that, from just not having that inflammation. Your food tolerance improves over time because those microbes are not fermenting the foods you're eating and causing gases and causing fluid shifts that lead to changes in the bathroom and the bowel movements. And even if you have some systemic food sensitivities, those inflammatory responses to food, those fade over time as well, because in many cases, the immune system eventually forgets that food was a problem. So that's the real goal. Not just restricting foods, but building up gut resilience. And we want your gut to be strong enough to handle a wide variety of foods again, so you can feel confident, nourished, and in control of your body. And if no one's ever helped you look at your symptoms through that lens, if you've only been told to cut things out and hope for the best, this might be the shift you've been needing. So in the last part of the episode, I'll walk you through some next steps, whether that's just downloading the anti-inflammatory food list I created, maybe making some food swaps, or exploring more personalized support. If you're still here with us, I hope this episode gave you a new perspective, because this is a totally different approach from what most people are told, and even just the common misconception of food and inflammation. And instead of blaming food or trying to eliminate your symptoms, we're asking why your body's reacting and then working from the inside out to fix it. And that is the path to real healing. That's how we calm inflammation at the root and rebuild food freedom again. So, if you're just looking for a place to start, you just want to start calming inflammation, definitely grab our anti-inflammatory foods list. It's totally free. It'll give you some great go-to foods to start supporting your gut, calming down inflammation right away. So these are just general foods that have an anti-inflammatory effect, which can be a big help. But if you're at the point where you're thinking, okay, I need help getting to the root, that's exactly what we do in our practice at Nutrition Resolution. So you can schedule a free 15-minute call with me. We'll talk about what's been going on with you, how it's been impacting your life, and whether it makes sense to work together. If it does, I'll walk you through the kind of testing and support we offer and help you map out a plan that actually gets you answers and real results. So the link to book that call is in the description and comments. So thank you so much for being here today. I know these conversations can feel heavy and even overwhelming when you're dealing with this, but I hope you're walking away with some clarity, direction, and a sense that healing really is possible, because it is.